welcome back. Excuse me. Uh, what I'm going to be talking about today essentially is the spectrum we're going to see in Western Europe as major powers in that continent begin to gravitate towards either absolutism, forms of government, or more enlightened or kind of more maybe liberal forms of government. This is going to be best exemplified on the absolute kind of side, where power is increasingly in the hands of autocratic monarchs, places like France, Spain. We'll see that also in the coagulation of power in the German states, particularly Prussia, but then also in Russia as well. And to the opposite end of the kind of ideological spectrum, you have powers like England and the Dutch Republic beginning to represent kind of more enlightened or don't really want to say democratic, but more diffused sources of political power, or an allocation of political power to a broader segment of society. And that's going to be best represented in a culminating event known as the Glorious Revolution, taking place in England in 1688 and 1690. So, what I want to start with is a rather focused look at France following the 30 Years' War, the events that are taking place there, because as we discussed last time, by 1648, France is a power on the rise. It is going to be the most powerful monarchy and regional power at the conclusion of the 30 Years' War. So we'll want to take a look at exactly what France is doing, what success it's enjoying, but at the same time, the sowing of seeds that are going to lead to massive discontent by the end of the 18th century, leading to the French Revolution. Those kind of trends, those roots can be traced all the way back to what we're going to be talking about during the latter part of the 17th century of France. Next, we'll turn attention to the German states in particular, as well as Peter the Great and his efforts in Russia, his expansion of power and his turn towards the West, and his efforts to westernize the Russian state in a very kind of unique, you might say, Western perspective, Russian perspective, and then round out the last parts of the this lecture talking about this glorious revolution in England. So to begin with here, French absolutism is steeped in this perpetuation of the doctrine of what's known as the divine right of kings. Okay, that monarchical powers, monarchical leaders were seen as quasi divine, that they had the authority or the good graces of God in order to legitimize their reign, their hold on power. So this, in many respects, in France, we're going to see this play out to its kind of, again, these kind of very autocratic ends, that this would give the sovereign absolute authority in virtually all matters of state. By the 17th century, Bishop Jacques Bousquet championed this idea of the divine right of kings and implementing it to its full effect. He was interested What is interesting here is that this idea of absolutism was, in some respects, kind of happening outside the formal kind of ranks of power within the monarchy itself. But it is something that French monarchs embraced readily, seeking any means to enhance their own power. And we see that, we will see that in the reigns of Louis the XIII and also primarily Louis the XIV. These two monarchs, successive monarchs, came to power at very young ages, and so therefore, government operation fell to the day-to-day operation of state fell to their ministers, as these two young boys, these young men, matured into taking over functions of state more formally. Excuse me. We talked about Cardinal Richelieu in the latter part of the 30 Years' War. This idea that he embraced of the raison d'etat, this implementation of national interest. But he also created a more, he was also interested in creating a more obedient domestic society within France itself. He looked to do so by stripping Huguenots, the French Protestants, of political and their semi-autonomous rights that had been spelled out since the Edict of Nantes in the 16th century. But also Richelieu established and created kind of a network of information gathering and surveillance or intelligence gathering within the French state. He had a well organized network of spies that would keep tabs on French nobles in order to crush any potential conspiracies that threatened the monarchy itself. So Richelieu here is obviously binding the country more closely to the monarchy. He appointed intendants, these kind of governing officials that were responsible for traveling the countryside to oversee the implementation of royal decrees and policy, to make sure that they were implemented at the provincial level. So again, he's imposing the monarchical power on these kind of more provincial leaders. We talked about also during the 30 Years' War how it was very had a very heavy impact on state finances. That the war itself was ruinous to virtually all the key state powers across Europe that were involved in this lengthy, particularly destructive conflict. Now, that was the case for France, obviously, but also French finances were suffered from corruption as well. Um, there was a heavy reliance on bribes, and as a result, what happens is that this was debilitating towards any type of authentic reform throughout French politics and also society. Richelieu, during the war itself, he was going to raise the taille, the annual tax on land and other properties. This increased some 2.5 times during the course of the 30 Years' War. The royal properties, again, land in the hands of the monarchy itself, were heavily mortgaged during this period of time to help finance the effort. So wartime costs here are outpacing revenues, and so French debt is continuing to spiral out of control, and that's something that we're going to see carry over into peacetime. in just a moment here. So Richelieu dies in 1642. Louis the 13th dies 6 months later, and so Louis's son, another Louis, Louis the 14th, becomes the next French monarch. But he was only 4 years old when he became the next head of the French state. So again, here, the matters of day-to-day functioning of state are going to fall to the king's ministers. That the most notable figure emerging during this period of time was another cardinal, Cardinal Mazarin. He was the kind of successor to Cardinal Richelieu, and Mazarin is going to, in many respects, keep Richelieu's policies in place. Mazarin was he was an Italian by birth, but he became a naturalized French citizen, and he would basically be a major kind of power broker in the French bureaucracy up until his death in 1661. At the conclusion of the 30 Years' War, there were rumblings within French society that led to outright kind of peasant revolts and protest. And this is best represented by what's known as the Fronde, a series of resistance efforts or uprisings that occurred in 1648 and 49. The first uprisings to hit Paris and rampage across much of France ended in compromise. But just a year later, a second uprising was outright crushed by force as Mazarin and his allies took advantage of internal divisions within this movement, the Fronde itself, which was basically a loose alliance, you might say, or an alliance of convenience between nobles who were resenting the loss of autonomy under Cardinal Richelieu's authority, and also the discontent of the French peasant class, as well, as they were the ones that were suffering most directly from taxation and this kind of consolidation of power into this kind of more autocratic format of absolutism. So literally by the half-century mark here in the 17th century, and the failure of the Fronde to exact any lasting reform, this meant that there was really no alternative for the remainder of the 17th century and well into the 18th century. There was no alternative to or organized resistance to a powerful French absolutist type of monarchy. As far as the reign of Louis XIV, while Mazarin was really kind of orchestrating matters of state, Louis himself was kind of a royal playboy during much of the 17th century as he matured. But the day after his chief advisor's death in the early 1660s, Louis wished to consolidate all political power into his hands alone, that he was fully intent on continuing that what now by now was really a French tradition, and what Louis XIV himself saw as his birthright. And this helps us understand the origins of what's known as the Age of Louis XIV. He begins to attach his identifying kind of power to symbolism of the sun, making him known in many circles as the Sun King. that he was the source of life itself in the French kingdom and all French territories, colonies, etc. And he, over the course of his reign, becomes the benchmark by which all other absolutist monarchs of the era were measured. And one of the best examples of his authority, his influence in kind of in reality and in literally stone was the construction of the Palace of Versailles, which took place between 1660 and 1668. This was the hub of all governing activity in France for Louis XIV's reign. It was the king's official residence. It was a sprawling estate, very lavish, leaving, you know, at extreme cost and luxury. Uh, it was the location of centralized government in France, in that it was not only a residence for the king, but it was also an office building for thousands of French bureaucrats and nobles. Anyone who looked to seek favor or government appointment would, you know, set up at least a temporary residency in the Palace of Versailles, hoping to curry favor with or gain an audience with King Louis the 14th. What's interesting is that this was also a calculated political move on the part of Louis the 14th. This kept the nobility close at hand, and it involved in what really in hindsight are very petty, superficial types of court matters, rather than involving themselves in matters of actual governance. Louis wanted any potential aristocratic rivals to stay where he could keep close track of them. What better way than to create this kind of very this palace playground for the upper echelons of French society. And that's exactly what played out here in the Palace of Versailles, roughly over the course of Louis the 14th's reign. That there was a healthy amount of hedonist type of behavior, pomp and circumstance, entertaining that took place, gambling, social networking, might say as well. And this really got down to very petty types of involvement. Things like nobles hoping to assist the king in his daily ceremonies, the handing over of the shirt that the sovereign would wear for that day, helping him get dressed, was seen as a great kind of opportunity. And this was and that this was the type of service that would need to be uh, conducted in order to curry favor with the king. That this is the way you achieved kind of an audience with the king. Um, Louis also, Louis the 14th, also counted on newer, kind of lesser nobles to exact or enact the policies of the king that he was calling for. Again, this is an effort to uh, manipulate those that were kind of new to the ranks of authority, and bind them closer to the king himself, that they would kind of be starstruck by the king's majesty. King Louis the 14th indeed had the final word on virtually all matters of state. This came into effect over matters of foreign policy, war and peace, secular and religious politics, as well as taxation. Regional and local governing were less impacted by absolutism on a day-to-day basis. Again, the king's officials often accepted bribes to allow for there to be a functioning of the status quo, in some cases to in continued defiance of the king's proposed changes. So there is this kind of undercurrent of dysfunction within the French monarchy or the French state itself, baked in, and that this is a characteristic that we're going to see kind of play out in absolutist forms of government over time. So you're going to have this wrestling match within these states as they, you know, the centralized authorities try to exact and impose their will more and more directly on the lower ranks of the social pyramid, essentially, and so it becomes this self-reinforcing kind of behavior on on behalf of these absolutist kinds of organizations of power. One example of this came about in October of 1685, where Louis XIV is going to issue what's known as the Edict of Fontainebleau. This is going to outright and officially revoke the Edict of Nantes. This is a reversal of the religious tolerances, allowing for the Catholic and Huguenot or French Protestant communities to coexist. With the Edict of Fontainebleau, Louis permits or allows for the destruction of Huguenot churches and the closing of Protestant schools across France. And Louis also sees Protestants as a threat to his autocratic and monotheistic rule, Catholic rule. This is going to help reinforce his idea of one king, one law, and one faith, to kind of you know, regiment affairs of state and faith in France itself. As a result of policies like this, approximately 200,000 Huguenots are going to flee France. They're either going to go to places like England, where there's a greater threshold, a greater tolerance for religious freedom, religious expression, or to the United Provinces, the Dutch Republic, or to the German states as well. Because the reign of Louis XIV was so focused on luxury and ostentatious kind of expressions of wealth and power, this meant that French finances were going to continue their spiraling of debt and just being completely out of control. The cost, as I mentioned, to the actual physical construction of the Palace of Versailles was astronomical. The expenses paid to maintaining courtly quality of life was also a kind of ongoing expense. There was also a series of costly wars in the latter half of the 17th and early part of the 18th century that were raging across Europe and the New World colonies as well. That meant that Louis XIV was going to have to, dole out considerable sums of money in order to support those conflicts. His chief financier, Jean-Baptiste Colbert, who was the controller of finances for much of Louis XIV's reign, applied again the standard mercantilist or mercantilist principles. Um, Colbert is going to push exports in order to expand the quality and quantity of French manufactured goods, but and at the same time minimize French dependency on imports, particularly from England and the Dutch republics, and actually raise tariffs on those goods coming from those powers, rivals. He's going to also Colbert is also going to transform France into a more of a business friendly state. He's going to extend invitations to skilled workers to come to France, where they could live and work. He was going to make efforts to attract a trained workforce and to enhance the training of a skilled workforce within France. He's going to extend benefits to entrepreneurs. This came in the form of tax exemptions, loans, as well as official state subsidies in order to open and sustain businesses. He is also going to improve the infrastructure, the physical infrastructure of France itself, building of roads and canals in order to improve the flow of goods. What all this means is that there is this puts even more pressure on state finances, and that's this is going to have expenses continue to outpace earnings, public earnings, even into this era of really peacetime. Even though there were a series of wars that we'll get to, the conflicts were small in scale compared to the 30 Years' War. And it brought about mixed results. The regulations that were offered or opened up to enhance business were often poorly enforced. Tariffs brought about that were brought about to collect public funds and offer some sort of regulatory measures often hurt the movement of French goods and exports. And therefore, French trading companies never caught up to English or even Dutch companies. This was not only within Europe itself, but also in New World settlement or in global colonization that was taking place. That the French did have a global colonial network, but it was always an effort, a struggle to attract French settlers to these areas of the world and really kind of establish a sustained commercial and even set up major urban centers in these colonies. The settlements in North America are a prime example, and something that, if you recall from I believe is the second episode of Niall Ferguson's six-part series on the ascent of money. He's talking about in the early 18th centuries John Law and his ruinous efforts to set up a glorious kind of utopian type of colonial settlement in New Orleans, in Louisiana, and how that just meets with disaster and bankruptcy. Well, it's those types of misfortunes that are really going to hamper and hamstring the French colonial strategies and efforts. As far as the conflicts that do emerge during the late 17th century, um, Louis the 14th is going to develop, he's going to train and deploy a professional army numbering some 400,000 men in wartime. Now, that's mainly as a result of the need for France as the strongest power in Europe to defend itself. Um, and over the course of his reign, he's going to be involved in four major conflicts. Um, so Louis XIV, starting in 1667, the French are going to invade Spanish held portions of the Netherlands. The remaining provinces, after Spain recognized Dutch independence, um, it did hold a few provinces under its control even after 1648, but now those were even being threatened. As a result, the Dutch, the English, and the Swedes are going to form a triple alliance in order to try and keep France in check. Later on in 1672, France is going to take it upon itself to retaliate against the Dutch, and which is going to lead to some territorial expansion in what's called the Franche-Comté, in the expanding France's eastern frontier. And this is going to help set the stage for the first of a series of conflicts with the Holy Roman Empire, between France and the Holy Roman Empire. By 1689 to 1697, there's the War of the League of Augsburg, a very costly conflict where France is going to expand into what is known as the Alsace-Lorraine province, where Spain, the Holy Roman Empire, Sweden, the Dutch, and the English are all going to be interested in trying to keep France in check. And also, early in the 18th century, the last of these major conflicts, the War of Spanish Succession, from 1702 to 1713, is going to be really the most significant, you might say, of these conflicts affecting Europe. As a background, you have here Charles the First, the King of Spain. He was a sickly, childless monarch, and he was also the last Spanish Habsburg member of the Habsburg dynasty. He's going to leave his throne to the grandson of Louis XIV, and this grandson was later going to become King Philip V of Spain. This is going to mark the establishment of what's known as the Bourbon dynasty, uniting kind of tenuously Spain and France together. And of course, this is going to immediately upset any types of balance of power within the European system. And French rivals are going to grow concerned that the entire balance of power was going to be ruined, essentially. So therefore, England, the Holy Roman Empire, Holland, and also the Habsburg branch of the Austrian Empire are going to join together to try and keep Spain and France in check. This was a long conflict. It was also spilled over into colonial holdings in the New World, so that this pitted English colonists in the mid-Atlantic region against French colonists and colonial possessions in what is today kind of the Great Lakes region, Canada, also down into the Mississippi Valley region, and New Orleans. One key kind of turning point was that in 1704 at the Battle of Blenheim, there were Allied forces were successful in defeating the French, led by the English forces led by, or Allied forces led by John Churchill, um, ancestor to Winston Churchill, who we'll talk about in World War II. But John Churchill managed to command Allied forces there to victory. And this is a pivotal turning point which helped culminate in the Peace of Utrecht, which basically ended the war. Now, the terms of this peace allowed the Bourbon dynasty to keep control over the Spanish throne. So there would be this ongoing kind of relationship, you might say, between the French and Spanish thrones being under control of the same family. But France and Spain would remain separate kingdoms. Um, the Spanish Netherlands, Milan, the remaining Spanish possessions in the Netherlands, also Spanish holdings in Milan and Naples, in what is today Italy, were surrendered from Spain to Austria, and the Germanic principalities of Prussia gained territory and with it influence, wealth, and power. England, as a result of this treaty, gained control over Gibraltar, which was the stronghold controlling access to the Mediterranean. It also gained colonial holdings in the New World, places like Newfoundland, the Hudson Bay, and areas of Nova Scotia as well. It's also as a result of this war that England is going to emerge as a major naval power to help keep French land and continental power in check. So let me pause here, and before picking up with turning attention to those Germanic states, Prussia in particular, and also focusing attention on Russia as well. Right, so that's what we'll pick up in part two.